a stranger's.
My dead husband had just told me whose blood paid for our son's cradle. Around my bleeding palm, he had tied the bandage exactly as he used to in our kitchen.
Did he know your name?
No.
I struck him. White light burned the shape of my hand across his cheek. I should have torn the bandage off next. Instead, my fingers closed around his knot. Why did I hold tighter after learning what he had done? If you love murderous vampire husbands, blood-bought cradles, and wives who still reach for them, follow for more. Now, where were we? Chapter 1. 10 minutes. The stolen key cut into my palm through my glove. Rain streamed down the cemetery gate and filled the hollow of the lock. The pale stranger stood between me and the graves, soaked through his storm blue coat, ash blonde hair, clinging to a face that had grown thinner every week. He was shivering. I nearly offered him my shawl.
Not today.
I fitted the key into the lock. Behind me, Tamsin cried out. The little ginger cat sprang after me when the gate opened and struck a line of pale light stretched across the entrance. It threw her backward into the mud. She rose with her fur standing on end and tried again. The light hurled her farther. The stranger looked at her, then at me.
Lenora, survive the next 10 minutes.
I went in anyway. Black water filled the carved letters of my husband's name, and the smaller name beside his. The earth moved beneath my knees. When the stranger caught my shoulder, the fine white line between my shoulder blades answered him with a flare bright enough to turn the rain silver. He released me as though I had burned him.
Please.
The ground split between the graves. His face changed. For an instant, the worn adulthood slipped from it, leaving something younger and far more frightened beneath.
Mother.
The cemetery opened. He caught my hand as mud and grave flowers dropped into the dark. His fingers held mine for one desperate moment. Then the earth tore us apart. White light spread from my back in the shape of one immense wing and the absence of another. The impossible word followed me down through the black water. Mother. Chapter 2. The key beneath my glove. 6 days earlier, I left a loaf of brown bread on my windowsill. I did it every market morning. Bellwater had people too proud to knock, and children too hungry to honor their parents' pride. A loaf beneath a folded cloth could disappear without obliging anyone to thank me. By noon, only crumbs remained. That morning, a woman carrying onions stepped on the hem of my dove-gray dress. I apologized before she did.
Oh, Lenora.
She said as though my name itself were a small sorrow.
You are too good.
Her companion glanced toward the cemetery road. I smiled. Correcting her would have meant standing there while both women watched my face. Then I walked home with my basket against my hip and my loose blonde braid darkened by mist. A strand had caught around the chain of my oval locket. I left it there until it pulled. Tamsin was asleep in the exact center of my pillow, orange paws folded beneath her cream-colored chest. My cottage was clean. The floors were swept, the kettle polished, the bed made before the sheets had cooled. Nothing remained where Matthias had last set it. I moved each object eventually, usually on a morning when the dust showed too plainly. I kept my simple gold wedding band, I kept the locket, I kept the cradle. It stood beneath a linen cover in the narrow back room. I had not lifted the cloth in years. I still dusted it every Thursday. On Fridays, I went to the cemetery. Matthias's grave was broad enough for his full name. Jonah Bellamy Calder needed only a small stone beside it. My son had lived 1 month. Matthias died before the season changed, and afterward the villagers began speaking to me, as though any sudden sound might finish breaking me. I brought pale flowers in a woven basket. I trimmed the grass around both stones, and pressed my forehead to Jonah's marker, after no one was near enough to see. Inside my left cuff, I had sewn a faded blue ribbon cut from his blanket. I rubbed it between 2 fingers whenever the words became difficult.
I'm still here.
I told them.
You don't have to be alone.
The sentence had begun as a promise. By the 6th year, repetition had worn it smooth. I said it even when I was angry with them. I said it when I resented Matthias for dying, and Jonah for having been too small to blame. I said it when laughter carried over the cemetery wall, and I hated the living for being careless enough to continue. Matthias had once come home after midnight with his collar fastened to his jaw. I was mending a pillowcase beside the stove. He stopped when he saw me awake.
Where have you been?
His left hand curled toward his palm before he answered.
Nowhere worth waking you for.
When I reached for his collar, he caught my wrist and kissed the center of my palm. I left my hand in his while the kettle hissed. When he released me, I reached for the cups instead of asking again. The pale stranger first appeared on the cemetery road 2 years before the storm. No one saw a cart bring his belongings to the cottage beyond the abandoned mill. The village women decided he was ill. The men decided he was avoiding a debt. He was slender and long-limbed, with pale blue eyes ringed in gold and a narrow coat that hung badly from his shoulders. Fine cracks sometimes showed near his temples. They vanished whenever I looked directly at them. He began waiting for me on Fridays. At first, he only walked beside me. Tamsin followed with her tail upright, stopping whenever he stopped. The silence remained tolerable until the 4th week, when he said,
They cannot hear you.
Then I am not inconveniencing them.
You are inconveniencing something.
At the gate, I turned.
My grief belongs to me.
Yes.
His gaze went to my basket, then away from Jonah's small marker. He never stepped across the border around the graves. He never looked directly at my son's name.
What answers it may not.
He returned the following week and the one after. Each time he looked more tired.
Stop praying for them.
He said one afternoon.
You have no right.
I know.
Then leave me alone.
I can't.
My grip tightened on the basket handle. I called him arrogant and walked faster. The grave first answered in early spring. My palm rested on the earth between the markers when the soil split beneath my fingers. A bead of black water rose from the crack and stood against the pull of the ground. The stranger made a sound like someone struck him in the chest. I wiped the water on my handkerchief. It left no stain.
What is it?
His face had gone white around the gold rings in his eyes.
You're not talking to them.
Then who am I talking to?
That is what I'm trying to keep you from learning.
He followed me home. At my door, I turned to tell him I would ask Elias Fenwick to keep him from the chapel grounds. The stranger lifted one shaking hand. A sharp pressure entered my back. My knees struck the doorstep. White light passed through my dress without burning the wool, and pain tore between my shoulder blades, as though something too large had been folded beneath my skin. Tamsin sprang from the windowsill and landed between us. She lowered her head to him. I thought she was preparing to attack.
What did you do?
I reached behind me. My fingers found unbroken cloth, unbroken skin, and beneath both a fine line burning white hot. The stranger's right shoulder sagged.
What I had left to give.
Get away from me.
Stop praying
His voice failed on the final word.
before it knows you.
I bolted the door. In the mirror, my blue eyes looked startlingly clear, above a face I scarcely recognized. My back was unbroken, except for a white line between my shoulder blades, fine as old thread. The dreams began that night. A cradle rocked beneath black water. A pale man's hand waited below it, palm open, never reaching upward. An infant breathed in short, catching pulls. A voice behind me said,
Open it.
I woke standing at my front door with the bolt drawn halfway back. Water ran from my bare feet. Black footprints crossed the floorboards from my bed. Tamsin sat beside them, rigid and wide-eyed. She touched one drop with her tongue and recoiled into the wall. After that, she slept against my ribs. Elias locked the cemetery 3 days later. He found me at the gate with his iron keys hanging from one broad hand. Rain had reddened his cheeks beneath his hood. Behind him, the flowers on Matthias's grave had blackened overnight, and the crack between the stones had widened enough to admit the edge of a coin.
The ground is sinking.
No one enters until I know why.
They are my graves.
They are graves in my keeping, beside a village full of living people.
His voice remained plain. That made it harder to fight.
Go home, Lenora.
I went home. After dusk, when the chapel stood empty, I returned and opened the vestry cupboard. The spare cemetery key hung from its peg. The white line in my back pulsed when my fingers closed around the iron. I slid the key beneath my glove. Chapter 3. The Day He Called Me Mother. By the time the gate closed behind us, Tamsin had struck the pale boundary twice. She remained outside, clawing mud from the bars, and calling in a voice I had never heard from her. The stranger flinched at every cry, but followed me toward the graves.
You knew I would come.
I knew silence would leave you unprotected.
Every week you came here and told me no without telling me why.
I stayed away until the crack widened. When I tried to frighten you, you only came sooner.
His borrowed face split faintly beside one eye.
I had one thing left to give, and I gave it badly.
The white line in my back burned. The earth between Matthias and Jonah rose beneath the rain, settled and rose again. The two stones tilted toward each other.
Your prayers weakened the boundary.
How do you know my words?
He looked at Jonah's grave and failed to look away quickly enough. I knelt in the mud, the ribbon inside my cuff pressed against my wrist.
I'm still here.
I began. He seized my shoulder. Light opened behind me in the shape of a wing. It passed through my dress and curved over the graves, casting every raindrop into sharp white fire. The stranger stumbled away. One side of his storm blue coat collapsed where a shoulder should have held it.
Lenora, don't finish.
You put this inside me because you knew I would disobey.
I put it there because I knew you might survive long enough to hate me for it.
Black water climbed into the carved letters of Matthias Calder. It moved next into Jonah Bellamy Calder, filling each name from below without spilling over the stone. The stranger's face broke open along the mouth.
Please, Mother.
The earth disappeared beneath me. His hand caught mine, then slipped. I fell through roots, freezing stone and water without a bottom. Above me, Tamsin struck the dying boundary once more. The cemetery vanished. The word did not. Chapter 4. The Sea That Remembered My Face. I woke on my knees in shallow water. The sky above me was the blue of a bruise, without moon or stars. Black water spread in every direction. Broken gravestones rose from it at crooked angles, their names worn away. Bells sounded somewhere beneath the surface, each note reaching my bones before my ears. My flowers and basket were gone. The cemetery key remained inside my glove. Jonah's ribbon still lay against my wrist. A woman crawled through the water nearby with both hands outstretched. Her mouth shaped a name that changed each time she tried to say it. Other figures wandered in the mist, clinging to stones or dragging lengths of chain. A hand burst from beneath the marker beside my ankle. 3 more followed. Their fingers closed around my skirt and pulled. The line in my back flared. White gold light curved around me, and the hands smoked where they crossed it. They withdrew with a wet hiss, the stranger's protection. I pressed a hand to the burning line beneath my dress, furious that his gift was the only reason those fingers had let go. I moved toward the bells because the mist appeared thinner there. The water stayed ankle-deep until my next step found nothing. I lurched back from a trench so sudden and black that the barrier gave no hint of its bottom. A flat stone surfaced 2 paces to my left. Another rose beyond it, then another, making a path around the depth. I stepped onto the first. Submerged bells lay beyond the trench, green with age. Some were no larger than cups. Others could have held a kneeling body. I gathered my skirt and placed each foot where the sand showed between them. A long shape moved through the mist beside me. My heel grazed bronze. The bell's note rolled beneath the sea. Every lost soul stopped whispering. Far away, something answered with a click of teeth. I crossed faster. Blue anemones glowed beneath the water ahead, thousands of them covering the floor. The first closed as I approached. The next folded after it. A dark line traveled through the field, each flower turning away from my living warmth and marking my position. Shapes shifted beyond the stones. One creature rose with limbs bent in too many places. Water poured from a mouth crowded with narrow teeth. Another crawled toward me on its elbows. The first struck my barrier and flew sideways. The second began circling. A cry came from the mist. A gaunt man in a scorched devotional robe was being dragged backward by a chain around his ankle. One side of his face was burned dark. Old shackles had fused around his wrists. A half-melted silver prayer ring clung to one finger. The creatures behind me were closing. The easier path led away from him. I caught his arms. The chain jerked from below hard enough to bring me to one knee. When the man's shoulder crossed into my light, the demon wrapped around his chain began to burn. Its scream shattered the stillness. White radiance raced across the water. 3 bells sounded. The man stared at my face. His clouded blue-gray eyes cleared around a terrible recognition.
You?
Do you know a way out?
His ruined fingers closed around my wrist. The softened ring pressed into my skin.
You left us in the fire.
Heat flashed through me, smoke, locked wood, someone pounding from the other side. Then the vision vanished.
What fire?
The chain snapped taut. Mist folded around him, and he was torn from my hands. A larger creature rose where he had disappeared, tall enough to brush the low clouds. My barrier flickered. A blade passed through its throat from behind. Black blood struck the sea. Before I could see who held the weapon, the mist closed. The body sank. To my left, broken stones toppled across a route crowded with demons. Ahead, pale footing appeared beneath the water. The path was too deliberate to be chance. I followed it. A half-sunken chapel emerged from the fog, its roof collapsed and bell tower leaning into the sea. Water filled the nave to my calves. Cracked saints watched from the walls with their faces scratched away. A man stood where the altar should have been. His long coat was the color of old wine. Dark brown hair touched his jaw and curled damply at the nape. Death had taken the softness from his face and left the severe bones beneath. His skin was pale as winter glass. The eyes I remembered as nearly brown burned deep garnet. A tarnished silver ring remained on his hand. Behind him, a panel of polished metal reflected the ruined chapel, the water, and me. It did not reflect him.
Matthias!
Recognition crossed his face. Then his left hand curled inward.
I don't know you.
I crossed the flooded chapel. He retreated one step. The light around me brightened, and he narrowed his eyes against it.
Your hand says otherwise.
Something moved in the doorway behind me. Matthias looked past my shoulder and shifted at once, placing himself between my body and the dark.
I keep living bait where it is useful.
His left hand stayed closed. Chapter 5: The Vampire Who Would Not Drink. Matthias left through the chapel's western arch and told me not to follow. I followed. He crossed the drowned ground without looking down, choosing firm sand before I could see where the depths began. Whenever the path narrowed, he took the outer edge. When anything moved in the mist, his wine-colored coat appeared between it and me.
You are leading me somewhere.
I am drawing attention away from a living pulse.
You used to lie better.
His left hand opened by force. A tall man stepped onto the water ahead as if it were polished stone. He was gray-pale beneath shoulder-length silver-blonde hair. Dark red runes scarred his throat above a rigid teal coat, and a narrow plate of silver armor covered one shoulder. His blade bore a ringed crown near the guard.
Calder, the king's executioner, conceals a living soul and calls it bait.
Matthias stopped.
Go back, Rodin.
A hidden pulse is the king's property to judge.
Ronan's ice-blue gaze moved over me.
Stand aside.
No.
Ronan struck. His seal-marked blade passed beneath Matthias's coat and opened his side. A branching black brand spread across his ribs. Blood hit the water and did not disperse. The crown carved into the blade shone once, and a thin dark thread slid away from Matthias's boots. The king's seal had entered his blood. Matthias stamped on the moving line. It divided around his soul and joined again beyond him. Ronan stepped toward me. Matthias reached through the barrier and caught my wrist. Holy light burned through his palm. The smell of scorched skin filled the air, as he dragged me behind him. My free hand scraped across a broken statue, and stone opened my palm in a red line. Ronan's blade had barely risen when Matthias seized him by the jaw and the back of the neck. He tore out Ronan's throat with one practiced movement and let the body fall. His gaze swept the mist for witnesses before it reached me. The marked blood continued toward the bells. My own blood reached the sea. The whispering stopped from one edge of the fog to the other. Every shape in it turned toward the red cloud spreading from my hand. Matthias raised his head slowly. His garnet eyes brightened. His mouth opened on a breath he did not need, and his canine teeth lengthened until their points touched his lower lip. He moved in front of me, facing the creatures gathering beyond the stones.
Wrap your hand.
I held it higher. His head turned before he forced it forward again.
Lenora.
You remember my name.
Cover the cut.
Say you remember me.
He crossed the space between us. My back struck a pillar. Matthias planted both hands against the stone beside my shoulders without touching me. Light pressed against his coat and smoked along the seams. His freshly burned palm left a dark mark on the wall. He kept his face turned from my throat. The effort made a muscle jump in his jaw. I raised my bleeding hand between us. His gaze fixed on the thin line across my palm. One of his fingers dug into the pillar. Stone cracked beneath it.
Move that closer, and I may take more than you mean to give.
Then why have you not?
His mouth hovered near the heel of my hand. Cold touched my skin before his lips did. He shut his eyes and turned away. His mouth trembled as it had beside Jonah's cradle during the final fever. He tore a strip from the antique cream lining of his sleeve. His burned fingers shook as he wrapped my palm, across, beneath the thumb, around the wrist, then tucked where the cloth would not pull when I flexed. He stopped. That was how he had bound my kitchen burns, my needle pricks, the cut I got while trimming the cradle before Jonah's birth. A voice behind us said,
He knew you before you spoke.
The pale stranger stood in the flooded aisle. His borrowed face was breaking apart. Fine seams ran from his temples to his throat. Beneath the storm blue coat, one shoulder ended in a torn root. A single ivory wing dragged through the water behind him. Matthias stepped away from me.
You promised.
I promised to try.
You were meant to keep her above.
I stayed away. The grave opened. I warned her. She stole the key.
The stranger's voice roughened.
There was no choice left that did not hurt her.
They had spoken of me before this. I heard it in the way Matthias said promised, and I felt it in the wing beneath my skin. I took Matthias's burned hand. The barrier seared him again. His fingers tightened around mine before he could stop them.
Look at me.
He did.
Tell me you don't know me.
His left hand lay open in mine. He could not say it. At his feet, the king's mark pulled his blood onward. Where the dark thread crossed pale stone, the water blushed pink. I had seen that color before in the basin beside our kitchen stove. Chapter 6. The Cradle Bought with Blood. The pink water carried me back to our kitchen. Matthias would return after midnight with his collar fastened too high. Once, while the kettle hissed, I reached to loosen it. He caught my wrist and kissed my palm until I forgot why I had lifted my hand. I had kept that memory as proof of tenderness.
What was beneath the collar?
He watched the marked blood creep through a crack in the chapel floor.
Bruises. Cuts.
From whom?
Men who paid me. Men who fought back. Men I fed on.
The line of blood found another crack and continued.
The basin. You washed at night. You told me the blood was yours.
It rarely was.
A bell sounded far beneath us. I remembered Silas Crowder at our table in his rust-colored waistcoat, one heavy hand resting on a brass watch chain. His cane leaned beside the door. He had praised my bread and asked whether the child kicked often. Matthias had barely eaten.
There was a man you called your mother's cousin.
Silas held my debt.
What happened after supper?
I killed him in the barn.
A thud I had blamed on a restless horse returned to me. Mud on Matthias's boots despite the frozen yard. His cuff turned inward, his left hand hidden under the table.
Why?
He had begun speaking of you as part of what I owed, and that made me hungry.
Silas's death bought us a road out of Bellwater. The money paid for it. Fear kept the other men from following.
We could have gone.
Yes.
We could have been poor somewhere else. I could have helped with feeding.
Feeding on you was never an option.
But you took another contract. You hurt people.
His gaze moved to the ribbon at my cuff. Winter was coming. The roof leaked beside our bed. I was pregnant, and the fruit crate I had lined with blankets offended him every time he passed it. He wanted dry firewood, 3 months' rent, and a proper cradle polished smooth enough that no splinter would touch the child. The man he killed for those things had never threatened us.
The cradle?
My voice scarcely carried over the water.
Whose blood paid for it?
A stranger's.
Did he know your name?
No.
I struck him. White light leapt from my hand. The shape of my palm burned across his cheek. His head turned with the blow. He faced me again without raising his hands.
Do not tell me you did it for us.
I did it because I wanted what the money bought, and it was the only way to keep me at bay.
You could have stopped. As I said, I could have fed you.
Never will I ever hurt you.
You let me rock our son in it. That cradle!
Lenora, it's the only way I know how to love you.
You stood in the doorway and watched us.
His mouth tightened.
I'm sorry.
The marked blood moved beneath a fallen pew and emerged on the other side.
Did you ever mean to tell me who you are? What you do?
No.
He offered no defense built from poverty, fear, his nature, or the men who had first taught him to kill. I wanted an excuse badly enough to despise him for refusing one.
Marriage made me want to stop. I kept killing.
The cloth around my palm was still tied exactly as he had always tied it. I wanted to tear it off. My fingers closed around the knot instead. I had crossed death for the husband I remembered. Now he stood before me with my hand scorched across his cheek, while a stranger's blood stained every memory of the cradle I dusted each Thursday.
Did you love Jonah?
His eyes moved to the faded ribbon. He had an answer for murder. He had none for our son. Chapter 7, The Knot He Should Not Know. Matthias wedged a slab of chapel stone across the marked blood. The dark thread vanished beneath it and appeared several feet farther on. Every time he broke it, another strand formed. The pale stranger watched from beside the drowned altar, his one wing trailing feathers that dissolved when they touched the water.
I held Jonah once.
I turned to him.
He was 4 days old. You were asleep.
His burned hand flexed.
He opened his eyes. I thought he could see what I was.
The stranger lowered his head.
I was hungry, not for him. But when he looked at me, the difference felt worthless. I put him back and went outside.
You never held him again.
No.
When he died, you decided it was punishment.
Yes.
And after?
I stopped avoiding the men who wanted me dead. I still moved when the knife came.
He looked at the water.
I moved late.
You left me with 2 graves because dying was easier than telling me the truth. You selfish.
The stranger stepped forward so quickly his dragging wings struck the altar.
Don't hide inside what happened to me. You left her after.
The chapel went silent except for the bells far below. My bandage loosened. Jonah's ribbon slipped from my cuff, and the stranger caught it before it fell into the water. Without looking down, he wound it around my palm. One broad loop, one narrow, the last tucked beneath so an infant could not pull it loose. My private knot. His fingers froze against my wrist.
How do you know that?
Do not answer.
I pulled my hand away.
You drove a wing into my back without asking. Matthias listened while I knelt at 2 graves for 6 years. Neither of you will decide what I'm allowed to know now.
The marked blood reached the foot of the altar. I placed my bandaged hand on one side of the stone. Matthias stood opposite me. After a moment, he set his burned palm across from mine. His tarnished silver wedding ring rested against the altar. My gold band lay inches away on the other side.
Why do you still wear it?
It would not come off.
Did you try?
Once.
Our fingers did not touch. The stone between them was black with drowned candle wax. The first submerged bell sounded, another answered. The dark signal passed beneath the chapel, and soon every bell in the sea was ringing. Outside, the blue anemones folded in a line leading toward us. Shapes in the mist lowered their heads. A tall figure stepped out of Matthias's marked blood. Chapter 8. The Prayer That Fell Downward. Marius Redgrave wore antique ivory instead of black. Gold chains crossed his narrow waist. Burgundy panels drifted behind him without touching the water. Auburn hair fell to his hips, and thin crimson lines marked his palms and circled his throat. A crown of golden rings floated behind his head. He knelt before me. With 2 fingers, he brushed silt from an invisible grave and spoke in my cadence.
I'm still here. You don't have to be alone.
My skin went cold. He opened one hand. It was the pale palm from my dreams, waiting beneath the drowned cradle.
You told me to open the door.
I told you where to find it.
Across the water, images rose. Elias locking the cemetery while I stood outside. Matthias kissing my palm so I would not open his collar. The pale stranger lifting a shaking hand before pain entered my back. Behind them waited an empty chapel, silent after every prayer I had sent upward. Marius let the images remain.
You listened.
Every word.
Matthias moved between us.
He put the dreams in your head.
Marius glanced at him.
And you heard her while she was awake.
I looked at my husband. His gaze dropped to the black water.
Did you hear me at the graves?
Every week.
You heard me speak to Jonah.
Yes.
You heard me tell you I was tired.
His left hand curled.
Yes.
You heard me ask you to take me with you.
The marked blood continued crawling beneath our feet.
Yes.
The word came out low enough that I nearly missed it. Marius rose.
Each time you knelt between those stones, the seam thinned. Your voice reached places prayer was never meant to reach. Things followed it.
And Matthias Kilpin?
He came below and asked leave to hunt whatever found the opening.
I looked at the blood on Matthias's coat.
What did it cost?
Service.
Matthias said nothing.
You watched me kneel there.
I said to him.
You let me believe no one heard.
I kept what answered from reaching you.
You never told me there was danger.
I knew what you would do.
My hand twitched at my side. I wanted to strike them both. Instead, I pulled my bandaged hand against my chest and felt Jonah's knot press into my skin. Marius watched the movement.
Heaven condemned his kind before he ever held a knife. Before he knew hunger from choice, a place had already been prepared for him here.
Matthias did not defend heaven.
That did not make me kill.
No.
Marius's golden eyes rested on him.
But it taught you no better ending waited.
Matthias held his gaze. Neither man withdrew the accusation. Marius reached for Jonah's ribbon. The pale stranger moved, but the king caught the loose end first. Warmth left my body, my knees weakened. The barrier dimmed around me, and the edge of the stranger's remaining wing blackened. Beneath my hand, where I had caught Matthias's sleeve, a pulse began beating in his throat. His skin warmed. Matthias inhaled in shock. Color entered his mouth. His chest rose against my palm, and for one unguarded moment he leaned into the touch. His eyes closed. Then Marius released the ribbon. Warmth tore back into me. Matthias went cold beneath my hand. The pale stranger collapsed against the altar. Marius had only closed his fingers around the ribbon, yet my heartbeat had passed into Matthias and returned. An infant appeared beneath the surface. He lay in the dark as calmly as if the sea were his cradle. Behind one ear was the crescent birthmark I had kissed during Jonah's final week. His small mouth opened around the same catching breath that had kept me awake through his last night. I stepped toward him. The one-winged stranger caught my sleeve.
Listen to what he asks, not what he shows.
Marius extended his crimson-lined hand.
Your husband, your child, ask below instead of above.
Jonah goes free.
Matthias returns without hunger. You take nothing from the living.
Marius studied me with almost tender patience.
Death keeps accounts.
What will it cost?
Turn your prayer toward me.
That is not an answer.
It is the only one you need before choosing.
He cannot return them whole.
Matthias spoke across him.
You will not bargain.
I was not asking either of you.
Lenora.
No.
Both men fell silent. The wing ached inside my back. The stranger whose blood had paid for the cradle would not leave my thoughts. Matthias and the pale stranger spoke across me, while Marius held out his hand and waited. The infant beneath the water drew another failing breath. Warmth had left the stranger in me to enter Matthias. I had felt the theft. Whatever Marius restored would be taken from someone else. I knew that. I also knew every warning I had received had come after someone else decided what truth I was fit to bear. I looked at the empty chapel reflected in the water.
Then hear me. I pray to you.
The wing was ripped from my spine. White light burst behind me and vanished. The barrier collapsed. Every creature in the drowned sea turned toward my pulse. Marius stepped close enough for the golden rings behind his head to shine around mine in the water.
Now, give me the thread you open.
His crimson palm rose toward my throat.
The bargain?
I heard your terms.
His fingers nearly touched my skin.
I never accepted them.
Behind me, the pale stranger drew one ragged breath.
I told you not today.
He reached behind himself for his remaining wing. Chapter 9, The Last Wing Burns. The pale stranger tore the wing from his back. Light poured from the empty root. His storm blue coat split across the shoulders, and the adult shape he wore began to fail. His face came apart first. The sharp cheekbones softened. His long limbs folded inward. Ash blonde hair curled around a much smaller face, and beneath one ear lay a pale crescent mark, the mark I had kissed in the cradle.
Jonah!
His blue and gold eyes found mine. For the first time, he looked directly at me, without borrowed years between us. Then he drove the severed wing between my shoulder blades. Pain folded me over. The barrier returned in a violent ring. Marius's hand struck it and burned crimson at the fingertips. The king stepped back, his patient expression breaking for the first time. Jonah fell wingless into the water. I reached for him. Marius caught him by the throat. Jonah's child body flickered inside the remnants of the pale stranger. Bare feet showed beneath a simple white robe. One small hand stretched toward me.
Mother!
I crossed one step before Matthias locked both arms around my waist.
Let me go!
Marius is waiting for you to leave the light.
My son is there.
I know.
Jonah's fingers closed on empty water as Marius drew him backward. His body dimmed until I could see the king's ivory coat through it. Then there was only black water. The new wing beat once inside my back. Its force drove Marius's creatures away from the chapel doors. Light spread across the drowned floor, tracing a path through the bells. Jonah had bought it with everything he had left. Matthias held me until I stopped fighting him. Then he lifted me. The barrier burned wherever his body touched mine. Smoke rose from his sleeves, his chest, and the side of his face. He carried me into the mist anyway. I kept looking over his shoulder. Marius did not pursue us. He stood where Jonah had vanished, one scorched hand closed at his side. At the submerged bells, the marked blood rose in 2 columns. They took matching shapes with translucent blue-gray skin and mirrored seals at their throats. One wore a smooth silver mask. The other's crimson mask was cracked down the center. Hooked chains uncoiled from their hands. A scorched figure appeared beside the largest bell. The lost soul with the half-melted ring looked at me once. There was no forgiveness in his ruined face. He raised both burned wrists and struck the bronze. The note split the sea. The hunter in the silver mask fractured from shoulder to hip and was dragged beneath the bell. The soul vanished with it, his softened prayer ring the last pale thing I saw. The second hunter followed the marked blood leaking from Matthias's side into the anemone field. Blue flowers folded around our warmth, forcing us onto a narrow strip of exposed stone. Matthias set me behind him. The hunter cast its chain. Matthias caught it around his burned forearm and stepped inside its reach. He turned the hook into the creature's throat, drove the seal at its chest against the stone, and held it there until its body emptied into dark water. He moved with the same clean knowledge he had once sold for money. The effort tore open the brand along his ribs. He stumbled. I unwrapped my palm and offered my wrist. His fangs descended against my pulse. His mouth hovered close enough for cold to enter my skin. Then he pressed my wrist flat against his chest.
The cradle already cost 1 stranger. Put your hand away.
You will fall.
Then I fall.
The boundary stood ahead like a wall of ordinary rain suspended in the underworld. Through it, I could see the cemetery upside down. 2 stones, bent grass, and the iron gate beneath a gray sky. Matthias carried me to the threshold. His arms were blackened where they held me. Blood filled 1 boot.
He told you the gate would kill you.
You stole the key. I tell you, your blood may make me take more than you offer, and you hold out your wrist.
You lied. Behind every locked thing.
Lenora.
How was I meant to hear you?
His face tightened.
Every time I say no, you reach for the nearest key.
I caught the front of his ruined coat.
Do you want me to come back?
The hunger, pain, and practiced coldness left his face.
Yes.
Then
Don't.
I kissed him. He stayed still until my mouth touched his. Then his burned hand rose to the back of my neck. His lips were cold and careful. My fingers tightened in his coat. He drew me closer despite the barrier scorching through his cuffs. And for a moment the kiss belonged to the kitchen, the cottage bed, and every ordinary touch I had mistaken for a complete marriage. 1 fang cut my lower lip. Living blood touched his tongue. His body went rigid. The kiss deepened with sudden, frightening force. His hand tightened at my neck. His mouth followed the blood before he tore himself away and turned his face aside. Red marked his lower lip. He touched my cheek with fingers. The barrier was burning.
Remember the man who never knew my name. Remember what bought the cradle. These burns do not pay him back.
I caught his wrist. He pushed me through the rain. Mud struck my knees. The cemetery returned with bells, cold air, and water running down both gravestones. Behind me, the ground sealed. At the gate, the pale line guttered and went out. Tamsin ran through it. I crawled to Jonah's marker and pressed my forehead to the wet stone.
I'm still here.
Black water filled the carved letters beneath my hands. The wing in my back pulled downward. The soil loosened. My fingers closed around the stolen key. I saw Jonah without wings, reaching for me while Marius drew him away. I lifted my palm before I finished the sentence. The black water receded. Tamsin sat beside me in the mud. After a long silence, the little ginger cat sighed like an exhausted woman.
I was told to watch. I have watched enough.
Chapter 10. The Cat Who Had Been Watching. Ginger fur opened into light. A small girl stood where the cat had been, straight-backed beneath an ivory capelet. Dense orange curls framed freckled cheeks. Amber beads circled one wrist, and compact cream and gold wings rested behind her shoulders.
Tamsin?
Hello, Lenora.
Why did you not stop me?
The line at the gate was not mine to cross.
Her chin lifted.
Watching is not stopping. I have objected to the distinction.
Her irritation faded when she looked at Jonah's grave.
Where did Marius take him?
I do not know.
The warped key shifted in my wet glove as my hand closed around it. Tamsin placed 2 fingers between my shoulder blades. The wing inside me recoiled from her touch, then settled.
This belonged to him, but what it remembers began before him.
She spoke a name that was not Lenora. The sound passed through me like a key entering an old lock. Fine, luminous markings spread across my shoulders beneath my wet dress. The cemetery vanished. I stood inside a monastery filled with smoke. My hands shone with celestial light. White wings spread behind me, whole and immense, their tips blackening in the heat. Below the chapel, a dark-haired prisoner waited inside an iron cell. I had come to free him. I set fire to the upper doors because I believed the lower passage was empty. It was not. A man hammered against a locked wooden door farther down the corridor. Shackles had burned his wrists. A silver prayer ring softened around one finger as the flames reached him. Benedict Hale saw my face through the smoke. You left us in the fire. The vision broke. I returned to the cemetery gasping, one hand buried in the wet grass. Tamsin waited until I could raise my head.
I did that.
Yes.
To free Matthias.
He wore another face then.
The wing moved beneath my skin. Before I could ask more, the graveyard disappeared again. Matthias stood outside a fortified room while an army gathered below. His hair was black, his coat fastened with bronze, but his left hand curled exactly as it had beside our kitchen stove.
Stay here.
He locked the door from the outside. I struck it with light until the hinges tore free. By the time I reached the battlements, creatures were following the bond between us. They poured through the passage meant for fleeing families. Matthias turned when he heard their screams. We died within reach of each other before dawn. The cemetery returned. The stolen key had cut through my glove. Blood ran along its warped teeth. Tamsin knelt in front of me.
He locked me away.
Yes.
And I followed.
Yes.
Did he know what would happen?
No.
Did I?
No.
I watched blood gather along the bent key while Tamsin held my gaze. A third memory took me before I was ready. A stone shelter stood behind me. Families crowded inside it, silent except for a child trying not to cough. Matthias waited beyond the threshold with blood on his sword.
Keep the door closed.
Then he walked into the dark. I watched until I could no longer see him. The people behind me began to whisper. I left the door. The creatures pursuing Matthias and me found the shelter before I found him. When the cemetery returned, I was on both knees. Rain moved through Tamsin's orange curls. She did not touch me again.
How many times?
Enough.
Was I always an angel?
Not always in body. The same soul kept returning.
And Matthias?
The same.
I looked toward his grave.
In every life?
You found one another.
The warped key lay in my bleeding palm. Its bent teeth had opened the cemetery because I could not bear a locked gate between me and the dead.
What happened after we found each other?
Tamsin glanced at the key.
He shut doors to protect you. You broke them. The danger following you found whoever stood on the other side.
The memories had shown me the same thing with bodies.
Were you there?
Sometimes as you knew me, sometimes only watching. Who told you to watch?
Her amber eyes lifted toward the paling sky.
Someone who never answered the only question that mattered.
Which question?
Whether you could change.
Dawn reached the cemetery wall. The markings across my shoulders began to fade. The monastery loosened first. The heat, the iron door, Benedict's ruined hand. Then the battlements and the shelter blurred at their edges. I tried to hold them. The wing would not let me. Even as the details slipped away, my hand remembered the locked doors. I remembered the people waiting behind me, Matthias disappearing into danger, and my own feet following. I looked at Jonah's small grave. This time, I said nothing. By the time Elias found me on the chapel steps, Tamsin had folded back into ginger fur. His pale eyes moved over my torn dress, the blood at my mouth, and the mud dried to my knees. I placed the cemetery key in his broad hand. Its teeth were bent. Black residue had fused into the iron. He turned it over once. His rough thumb paused where the metal had warped. I waited for a question. Elias closed his fingers around the key. Tamsin walked beside me down the road. The cemetery lock clicked after we had already left. Chapter 11. The Man Across the Rain. The electric kettle clicks off while Robin smears peach jam across my sleeve. The child laughs in my arms, copper-lit curls tickling my chin. The sound catches beneath my ribs for a reason I cannot name. I know the facts about Robin's father. His name is Matthias Calder. We met in a cafe and shared an apartment for 7 months. I asked him to leave before Robin was born. Money arrives each month through a solicitor, and he has never used it to demand my door. His name remains in the father's box on Robin's hospital file. The memories have no warmth. They feel copied from an account someone else wrote. Robin turns toward the rain-covered window. A man stands across the street in a dark navy coat. I recognize him. The glass reflects wet pavement, passing lights, and a red umbrella moving behind him. It does not reflect his body. His left hand curls inward. Then, deliberately, he opens it. He raises his palm toward the window. Robin lifts one small hand in return. The feather charm on the child's peach cardigan catches the light. An old pain moves between my shoulder blades. My fingers settle on the window latch. Across the street, Matthias takes one step toward the crossing. I release the latch. My palm stays against the closed glass. He stops. For a moment, his hand remains lifted opposite mine. Then he lowers it, turns, and walks away. Robin tugs my hair, impatient to be held properly. I gather the child closer and turn from the window. Rain fills the place where Matthias stood.
I hope I kept you company with my story. It would mean so much for you to like and subscribe because it helps me make more. I'll see you in the next one.